Really what I'm going to try and cover with you today is the key fundamental elements to look at in supply chain, in your supply chain dynamics, and how to improve those in order to provide quicker customer service. Because ultimately in today's world, everything is about the consumer, and the consumer wants it, and they want it now, and it's how you're able to support that. So without too much further ado, I'm going to move on so that we can try and catch up on some time. And the clicker is not working. There we go. So in logistics, we like to refer to the retail revolution. Gone are the good old days of shopping, where a customer actually walked into a physical store during normal trading hours, bought the goods and left. Technology has given consumers far more autonomy to decide how they want to do these things, and that has also forced you as retailers to now consider interacting and transacting with people through various channels. This is now creating a major change in terms of how you structure your supply chains and how you address the need to service the consumer. So what happens is you have a multi-channel industry which has to provide a seamless customer service, and it involves a whole lot of elements and challenges. A lot of these have been discussed over the various presentations over yesterday and today, but just to touch on them briefly, retailers are facing 4 key challenges. The first is that of the rise of the emerging economies. As we spoke yesterday, there is a growing middle class with more money to spend, and that is causing supply chain issues for retailers. We're also moving into a multi-channel revolution or a multi-channel environment, and we had Zane and the lady from Zando talking to us about playing in the e-space. And the fact of the matter is that provides enormous supply chain dynamics and challenges. And it's an area that is growing and growing quite rapidly, so you have to come to terms with it. The third area that we're looking at is that of personalized customer contact. It's becoming more and more important to take consumer behavior into account. Customers want to buy when they want, how they want, and get it delivered as quickly as possible. So in terms of your supply chain, you're talking about, in fact, in the Gartner research, they mentioned that 50% of leading retailers will be providing real-time, personalized offers to consumers by 2015. Now, if you take what that involves for a supply chain, you can only begin to imagine, as someone said yesterday, what lies beneath the surface on the iceberg, as opposed to just the tip. And then, of course, historically, we've always had supermarket chains, etc., that have had smaller stores in more rural areas, etc. But now with the change in the economic climate, consumers are wanting to have brands closer to home and in different looks and shapes of stores. And this, again, introduces some more challenges on a supply chain perspective. So, from a logistics provider and from a logistics point of view, retail is not just simply retail. And I'm sure you all know that. We have a broad and diverse range of subsectors within the retail industry, and each of them bring their own supply chain dynamics, and each of them bring their own challenges. So if we have a quick look here, let's start with hotels and restaurants. These are very customer-centric environments, and they are dealing with high volume of products. In many cases, they're dealing with a lot of fresh produce and those kinds of things, which then bring a supply chain dynamic of temperature control into the transportation system. And that's very challenging. Also, with hotels, in order for them to be efficient and very profitable, they need to ensure that they keep minimal stocks and that they turn those over as quickly as possible. And again, those have some very challenging elements for the supply chain. If you move on to general merchandise retailers, again, we're talking about department stores, supermarkets, etc. The key here is that they're having to expand into new geographies. We just spoke about the fact that consumers or the middle class is growing, and if you look at just Africa as a continent, that is spreading to different areas where retailers were not playing previously, and they now have supply chain issues in terms of getting stocks and merchandise out to these areas. If you take the fashion and the apparel sector, again, here we spoke about it yesterday, in fact, there is a lot of focus on the rising cost of the raw materials. there is a huge consumer demand for ethical production and the delivery of these goods with minimal carbon footprint. It's something that the generation, someone yesterday was speaking about the millennials, something that's very important to them. And that has brought about enormous challenges in the supply chain. And these are things that play a big role in terms of how you service your customers and how quickly you get your product out to them. And the last but really important thing, and I know that we've got a lot of people from the sector in this conference, is that the key to this subsector of retail is all about the reverse logistics. It's all about how do you manage the returns and how do you keep that process flowing with minimal cost. You then move on to the luxury item sector, and this sector really is the one that is most affected by globalization. You've got the globalization of brands, and you've got markets out there that are now interested in acquiring brands that were previously, retained in the key markets, etc. And one of the major supply chain dynamics or issues in this sector is that of security. And it's not something that people often think about, but the luxury goods sector is a sector where individual items are generally of a higher value. And so therefore, shrinkage control is important, because if your shrinkage is out of control, your profitability goes through a hole in the ground. And then lastly, you've got specialty retailers. And this is really where the consumer demands and competition is extremely high. So it all boils down to the pressure on the retailer on improving their lead times, on getting the stock forecasting correct, understanding and knowing your business well enough to know what stock's going to move, what's not going to move, how quickly do you need to have it in store, and working backwards in your supply chain. So whilst many of you think that retail is very interesting and the multi-channel, all of these things produce wonderful opportunity, they sure do. But they also produce enormous amounts of challenges from your supply chain. And ultimately, your supply chain is the backbone of your organization, because it's all good and well to have these wonderful promotions on e-sites and mobile-friendly sites and all these things, but if you can't deliver the goods, you're going to be out of business quicker than you can say tiddlywinks. So ultimately, a business has to spend the amount of time focusing on its supply chain. So if you look at all those dynamics, I've summarized it into the actual supply chain challenges that logistics people experience. Now, these logistics people may be based within your organization, if you're one of the fortunate organizations to have some of the pretty scarce resource internally. Otherwise, it is a set of challenges that is faced by the logistics providers in organizations such as that which I represent, DHL. And we've got to find ways to address these challenges in order for the retail sector to deliver on what it's looking for. So if we just touch on these briefly, really the key, and a couple of the presenters have spoken about it, the key in optimizing your supply chain and having a very agile and responsive supply chain is really in terms of understanding your own supply chain and designing it. Not enough time is spent understanding what the challenges for your business are. So remember, I just spoke about the different sectors and what the challenges are for a hotel versus a luxury goods item. Take the time to understand what your key challenges are. So is it cost? Is it price and margin pressure that you're under? Or is it the fact that you need to access global markets and your geographical locations are changing immensely? Or is it the fact that someone mentioned it yesterday, that a customer now wants one bottle of shampoo delivered to him when he wants it, as quickly as possible? Again, you need to look at the other elements. Is it about end-to-end security in your product? Getting your items delivered from your suppliers to yourself and then on to your customer without it being tampered with, stolen, damaged, etc. And then, last but not least, we're all green, okay? We're all into the protecting the environment. We understand the importance of it. But the question here, in terms of how to improve your supply chain, is, are you actually thinking about these things when you design your supply chain? And that's really the key. is that you spend a lot of time designing your marketing strategy. You spend a lot of time researching and analyzing who your target market will be, what your LSM sectors are that you're going to focus on. But are you affording the same amount of time, energy, research into designing your supply chain? Because that is going to be critical to your success or failure going forward. So if you've got that first bit right, and you've designed your supply chain based on what is pertinent to your business, and not that which is affecting your competitors or Joe Soap down the street, but really about your own issues in-house, then the next step stands to reason that you've got to be good at managing it, right? Because what's the point of having a system and then you don't manage it? And this is where a lot of the customer service falls down, because you have this supply chain design that is more ambitious than it is realistic, okay? And then you're not managing it by looking into the elements. So what are the things that you have to do to manage a supply chain? There's really 3 fundamental phases in supply chain management, and they begin here with basic supply chain, which is called expediting. And we all know what that is. It's very simple. Make sure you got the stuff, it's available, and that you can get it out to your consumer, and that you're keeping that chain alive. So in essence, this part of supply chain management is the absolute fundamentals. You're making it happen. You've got a product, you're getting it out on the shelves, and you're providing it to your customers. But then you move on to the next part of your supply chain management. And that is the bit where it requires a little bit more effort and a little bit more understanding. Okay? You have to still work at keeping your system running, but now you have to start looking at ways of improving it. So now you've got to start looking at things like, okay, so the factors affecting my business have changed slightly, and cost is becoming more of a factor than it was before. So what do I need to do to address cost in this case? Or, for example, you know, a lot of people tend to leave the green things to the last and say, you know, customers are more interested in price and customers are more interested in speed. The reality is that today's consumer is a very ethical consumer, and those elements are far more important, and a lot of businesses that have planned their entire supply chain around squeezing the costs and speeding up the pace now have to relook and cover the hurdles and get over the hurdles that they're facing based on consumers that are questioning their carbon footprint and saying, well, what are you going to do about it? So this is that area of the supply chain management. Lastly, you then start to move into what is called strategic supply chain management. And whilst I'm explaining these, and they all sound very simple and easy, I think you all appreciate that there is a myriad of issues beneath the surface that need to be addressed. And in strategic supply chain management is where you become a leading retailer. And this is ultimately where you need to be focusing, and everyone's wanting to be, so that you can have your competitive edge. And in order to be a leading retailer and have a leading supply chain management, you have to not only make it happen, you have to not only overcome the little hurdles that are going to come your way throughout it, but you have to do it differently. Okay? And again, this is the key. You've heard all about doing it differently from the marketing perspectives yesterday, doing it differently through e-com and through mobile. But again, don't forget that the fulfillment of your products to your consumers can be a key differentiator and something that you shouldn't overlook. And this would be the area where you would spend the time doing that. So, although it's easier said than done, if you get this under the belt, you then move on to the next bit, and that is the ultimate goal. This is where every retailer wants to be in terms of their supply chain, and that is having a resilient, agile, very responsive supply chain. Okay? And we all want that, but the question is, have you been doing the steps that lead up to you having this kind of a supply chain, agile and responsive? In terms of a resilient supply chain, which is ultimately, as I said, the backbone of any business, you have a couple of characteristics, which I've highlighted at the top here. And these characteristics are not to be undermined in terms of the complexity that goes within those. You need to have visibility. As a retailer, you have to be able to monitor your supply chain, see what's happening with it. Are there any delays that have happened? Is there a customs delay in terms of clearance of your goods? Has there been a change of customs tariff headings and the duties that are now applicable in that case? All of these things have to be visible to you in order for you to respond to them. Okay? So it's not just about getting somebody out there and you strike a deal with a supplier in China and you figure out what the tariff heading is and you're good to go. Yes, simplistically, that's what it's about, but that's not what is going to keep you ahead of the market, and it's certainly not what's going to make you a leading retailer. What does having visibility do for you? Well, having visibility is what leads to the next step. It gives you that flexibility. You know what? We all say it, eh? Nobody likes surprises if they're unpleasant surprises, right? Okay? Because why? Because you need to have a plan B. And that's what the flexibility element in your supply chain is all about, which is that you design your supply chain, as we said earlier, on the key factors that are affecting your business and the key factors that you want to address in your business. But you're going to have glitches along the way, and you're going to have to amend those. And your supply chain cannot be rigid, so that when this problem happens, that it all falls apart. You have to have enough flexibility in there that there's a bit of a plan B, that your supply chain can be molded according to what the latest challenge is. And then Hilton, in fact, touched on this in his presentation briefly just before mine. It's about collaboration. The days of that aggressive supplier, customer relationship are long gone. The only way that you are going to lead the market, the only way that you're going to be the leading retailer is if you collaborate with your suppliers, if you collaborate with your supply chain people, your logistics people, etc., and you find the best possible way to process your goods through the supply chain and through the life cycle. And what does that give you? Ultimately, it gives you what you're looking for, which is control. If you have all of these elements in place, you control the single largest element, in my opinion, because I'm a logistics provider, the single largest element of your success. Because, as I said earlier on, it's all good and well to have this wonderful offering out there to the consumer that's really creative and it's talking to them on social platforms and all these fantastic things. But if you can't deliver the goods when they want them, you're history. Okay? And control is what's going to bring that for you. So, lots of things in there, lots of design elements, lots of things you have to control and view and whatever. But oh my goodness, what if you don't have that in-house? And I mentioned earlier on in that a lot of retailers require very specialist supply chain managers and people who are experts in this field. And as we know, skills shortage is something that is very common in Africa, even in South Africa, even though we believe that South Africa has advanced more than some of our other countries on the continent. So one of the things that you can resort to here is, highlighting and finding a strategic resource that can help you optimize your supply chain. And again, this isn't a pitch, okay, on just go out there and give out your logistics to the first provider you can find. It's not about that. It's about having done that work, understanding what your challenges are. It's about having done the work and the research and understanding the talent level within your organization and knowing where the gaps are. And when you know where those gaps are, you can then go out and procure a resource partner that can assist you. And it can be a resource partner that's only going to assist you in one area. So you might not know how to design your supply chain, but you might have a brilliant logistics manager. So you can go out and find a partner that can help you with the strategic planning and the designing and getting your supply chain up and running. Or you might decide that actually you've got all of that under control and all that you need is someone who's actually going to be able to deliver the goods and play a role in assisting you in finding the cheapest, fastest ways to deliver your goods from your suppliers to you, from you to your consumers. So again, outsourcing is a very common way of approaching supply chain dynamics and supply chain issues, particularly in a retail environment. And this is really just to highlight that there are a number of ways in which you can do it. And it's not just the basics. It's not just having a transport company that arrives on time, fetches the boxes, and delivers it to your stores on time. It's about all those other things. It's about the value-added services. It's about taking away from your business things that are non-core and that you shouldn't be focusing your time on. So if we take an example of a fashion business, is it your core business to have to tag your items? And would it be in your interest to outsource that to someone who, for example, maybe uses RFID, radio frequency, in terms of tagging of items? These are all the different elements that you could think of. Remember, not only in your approaching the customers is technology hugely available, but also hugely expensive. Likewise, in your supply chain, the designing of it, the managing of it, and the running of the logistics of your organization, there's enormous amounts of technology available, and they are amazing. They're, you know, pretty much the only thing they can't do is make your sandwich, but other than that, you can just about get anything out of these systems. The problem is, are they affordable to your organization? And B, do you have someone who has the skills and talents and abilities to use this technology to the best advantage of your business? So again, it's about being honest with yourself, okay? You want to improve your customer service, and you're a retailer. Are you a logistics specialist? If yes, great. If no, well, then go and get the help where you need it, okay? So again, what the slide is really telling you is it's about looking inwards. You know, supply chain dynamics is all about looking inwards. You spend a lot of time looking what's out there in the market, but you have to look inwards and see how you're designed and created internally. If you then move on, I'm not really going to spend too much time on this slide. Why outsource? I think I've really covered it. The essence, though, is this last sentence. The payoff is a strategic competitive advantage that is self-sustaining even when the market continues to change. And I guess that's really the key here, because as a retailer in whatever sector that you're in, you have to be ever changing to address your consumer and your consumer's needs. And that, as we all know, changes quite dramatically. The pace at which that's happening gets faster and faster. So do you have the time, the efforts, the resources, and the funds available to continuously redesign your supply chain at the same pace? Okay, these are the questions that you need to ask yourself. And you need to then look at where you can find ways of having that kind of support for your organization. So just to cover very briefly, how would you do it, and what does this life cycle look like? Again, I said earlier on, you can do this in bits, as small or as large as you would like. So you could go for a traditional type of solution, where you're speaking to a resource partner that is assisting you with the very core services, the very simple thing, inbound logistics, the freight, the ocean freight, the air freight, the customs clearances, all those kinds of things. You even talking to them about dedicated transportation, the distribution to your warehouses or to your end consumers, those kinds of things. That's an option. You can have that kind of a partnership or that kind of a relationship, or you can move on to a more leading type of logistics partnership. And a leading logistics partnership involves a little more than just the core. It takes you all the way through to the planning and optimization. So again, you can see all the elements that are in here. You're now starting to talk about warehouse management. You're now starting to talk about inventory optimization. It's, the just-in-time delivery of your inventory, etc. So your relationship with your partner could grow to that level. And of course, if you're really looking to be visionary and to be complete leaders and owners of your sector, then you should be talking about supply chain partnerships. And again, I emphasize that that can happen internally in your own organization. It doesn't have to be outsourced. But what you have to have is relationships with all the various parties that touch your products and impact your service to your consumer in this entire pyramid. Okay. And that is really what is critical in terms of becoming visionary in that area. I've got a little graphic, if the slide, well, there we go. So what happens is that if you go through all of these phases, this is effectively, just a pictogram of what a supply chain can look like. And it's got a whole lot of variables within these elements. But these are the traditional steps that you would see in a retail supply chain. And these are all the areas that you have to consider, that you have under control, that you have visibility of, that you have flexibility to adapt and amend when you face challenges and changes, and that ultimately you can control to deliver great service to your customer. It's very difficult, as all the speakers have said to you, to try and summarize what could be an enormous dissertation to talk to you about into a couple of slides. But hopefully, the most important thing that we'll remember is, why are we even talking about supply chain logistics? And it comes back to the very fundamental key that we've been talking about in different ways through different topics across the last 2 days. It all comes back to the customer. The reason that you have to be interested in supply chain, whether you like it or not, is because you are wanting to satisfy your customer. And in order to satisfy your customer, this plays a fundamental role. So if you speed up your supply chain, okay, remember I was talking to you about how supply chain improvements can help your provision of customer service. This is what it's all about, okay? You can have better product delivery to your customer. Nothing more impressive than when the customer orders, clicks, and wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, there's your product delivered in great, packaging, nicely unaffected, not stolen, not damaged, etc. Nothing better than when a customer has a query or a requirement of you and he's trying to follow up on his order or wondering where his items are, that you can give him great, detailed, accurate information and responses on where his order stands within your organization. And therefore, you're seen as a responsive organization, and hopefully you won't appear on the Blue Peters or Hello Peters of this world that Hilton made reference to earlier on. And whilst it's better responsiveness, it's not the same as faster responsiveness. So there's nothing worse than someone who responds to your query quickly and tells you absolutely nothing. Okay? And you're left in no better position as to where your order is, where your items are, what it's going to cost you. So the key, again, in supply chain logistics and having a really professional, resilient, agile supply chain is about being able to respond quickly, but with good information that makes a difference. And hopefully that's going to lead you into becoming a really great retail provider. So my quickest presentation ever on supply chain logistics, but hopefully I've covered items that will give you some food for thought.
Fantastic. Have you got some questions? Any questions? No? I've got a question.
Okay.
I was talking about e-commerce and digital. I always found that, and I'm just going to talk a bit sort of broadly, but companies like DHL and FedEx, who are American-owned or internationally owned, who have bases in South Africa, are generally franchised operations. And you spoke about technology. I always found that as somebody who wanted to move into that area, the technology is available, but it's generally sitting with the American head office. And when you beg and plead to try and get the technology available here, it's a case of it's not available to the South African market. And then it becomes an internal costly exercise to make that technology available. How do you overcome that? How do we get that American technology, which has been developed for Amazon and all the big boys already, how do we get access to that?
Okay. It's difficult to answer that without punting DHL, okay? But I'll do my very best. Really, the key is in identifying your partner and your resource partner. You have to know who you're getting into bed with, so to speak, and you need to do your homework. Again, nothing in your supply chain should be something that you make a quick decision on. So you should be looking at those partners, and there are partners that have that infrastructure, that technology, etc., locally. A lot of the organizations, such as ourselves, are internationally based in terms of our ownership, but have been around for many, many years. If I'll digress for 2 minutes on DHL, we've been on the African continent for over 35 years. Okay? And we have brought that and grown that talent and that skill base in the countries here. But of course, it's all about globalization. So those foreign technologies matter because those are the markets that you're interacting with. So the short answer, which is not detailed enough, but the short answer is really you spend the time on identifying your partner, number one, but you can't do that until you've spent the time identifying what your key issue is that you want to address. Because lots of people can tell you lots of things, okay, but it's about selectively picking the single most important thing that's going to make the difference.
So do you have access to that technology?
Yes, we do.
From DHL America, you've got access to that. If anybody here wanted something that Amazon does, a very similar in an e-commerce environment, you could. I'm so glad you raised them because DHL is the delivery logistics provider for Amazon. So absolutely, we currently provide services to Kalahari. We do a whole lot of logistics services for a number of you that are in this room, in fact, when I was looking at the customer base. So yes, it exists. It's here. It's a lot closer than you think, and it's a lot cheaper than you think. Where it gets expensive is when you don't know what you want, and you get all excited about the things that we can show and offer, and you don't actually